Hello, my name is Kim Dongseong, and I'm working as a service QA at Line. It is a great honor to meet you. Today's session is about how is the difference between Line QA and QA. So I would like to talk about the roles, the directions, and the working methods of a QA at Line. Let's start my presentation. Before we start, I wanted to talk about the role of a QA. Do you know what a QA does accurately? Do you still think that a QA is pretty much a tester? If that is the case, I do believe that we should look at the definition of each role. As you're probably well aware, development and testing also developed as the software industry was advancing. And now, distinguishing between a tester and a QA is possible by many people, but I don't think they understand in detail. Tester means that they will test the functions after development, and QAs are pretty much finding bugs and reporting for deployment. And this is probably what people think. But is this all what the QA does? I have written down the roles that I've experienced as a QA. Quality, of course, is most important. Second, communication and guide. In other words, as you are going through the project, you have to communicate with the various interest members of the teams. And assistant means that you have to support the overall process of all tasks. Fourth is analysis and management. So, therefore, you might be able to analyze the product, the spec, architecture, and EC, and testing before and after needs to be reviewed and managed. And lastly is about feedback and improvement. So you need to review and evaluate the process of the task to improve it in the future. And you can see that there are more roles that the QA has compared to a tester. So yes, a QA can just be limited to testing, but the QA role has more cross-functional roles covering the overall process of a product. To summarize what the QA role is, QAs are in charge of achieving a certain level of quality before a product's release. And so all the processes and the procedures that are necessary to achieve this goal. And I think my introduction was rather long, but let's look at how QAs work at Line. The QAs in Line work as the following. They plan and analyze. This is what happens during the planning phase of a product, co-work and testing. So during the development, they need to cooperate with many departments and also need to test. Third, feedback and improvement. So after deployment and development, they need to accept feedback so that they can improve for the future. And last is the build quality culture. In order to increase the quality of a development build, we create a culture and promote it. Now, first, about planning and analyzing. Okay, let's talk about planning and analyzing, which is the first step. During the planning phase, AQA would participate in the kickoff meeting to get the information that you need to define the spec of the product. The roadmap and milestones are also something that need to be reviewed with the product owner. And of course, the department related team will create these documents, but you also have to consider about the dependencies and the expected risks and costs, and the deployment schedule based on each level is something that the QA needs to give a detailed guide about. Next is about the spec and story review. So based on the planner's request, you have to consider all the scenarios so that they can be configured in all items. And lastly, you also have to think about all features that have been requested so that after the development, they can be seen in a platform such as an agile board to the whole team. Next, I want to talk about analyzing. So the new features that have been shared in the kickoff meeting will be reviewed overall from the product's perspective. So whether this has a meaning, business meaning, are there any interlapping areas? Is it too fast, or are there the pros and cons compared to a competitor? And if there are any wrong definitions or anything that is vague, this needs to be reviewed. Next is about testability. What kind of test is necessary to review all these features, whether it's an A/B test for the code integration or automation, or what kind of conditions and environments are needed for testing. And we have to cooperate with all client server engineers and all members. Therefore, the guidance of a QA should be pretty informative. And we also have to share about the release feature. And this is not just about a single feature, but a very detailed cooperation needs to happen amongst all domains that are impacted. And I do believe that most QA play a role in planning and analyzing. But what's the difference between the two? In order to carry out this role, we have three criterias. The user role. So everything should be based on how the user uses it. And based on the user's scenarios, we have to create the stories and review them. And in order to review it, we have to make decisions based on data. So it shouldn't be hypotheses that you make your decision on. It should be data that should back up your statement. And therefore, QAs will collect the necessary data that is necessary to make this decision. And lastly, we need to review and give feedback so that the review is reflected into the build and manage it until it is fixed. And I do believe that these are the differences. Second is about what the QA does in co-work and testing. Amongst the co-work, the QA will be a reviewer. So the planning document and the architecture will be reviewed by the QA. And even if it's negative feedback, this has to be actively considered and accepted because of the quality. And inspection and work through and interviews will help to decrease the complexity and the vagueness of the features to make sure that they're defined specifically as possible. Second of all is the support and assistance during the development process. If there are any items that need to be considered by the development, they should be written down and shared to the developer. So the cases that can be rather predictable or comparing the spec of the previous and current build is something that the QA can also do. And if there are any special tests that are needed, you could also request a unity test and give advice about these aspects. And amongst the co-work, you can also train or coach the developers. So for the developer to test himself, you could give the definitions of what kind of tests are necessary at what level, what's the method, and what's the test process. And during these stages, the session or the feature shouldn't be the only focal point of the developer, but it has to be the guidance should be focusing on the overall product. Next is about the testing stage. You probably know well aware about not only the review, but also all requests should be documented so that they can be tested. So we use mind maps or scenarios or make sure that nothing is missing. And once the design is completed, we make sure that this defines the purpose, the environment, and the method. And if it's a new and a large scale project, it all has to be shared to the planner, servers, and clients in order to increase the quality of the product. The test plan and design, after that's done, we also have to create test cases. And the test cases need to be reviewed whether they work as they were requested after the development. And the QA also might have to prepare test cases himself. And for testers, for the test engineer, the test plan and the trading based on cases are also carried out. And through reviews and feedback, the engineers are prepared so that they accurately understand what their target is. Co-working and testing are probably similar to what other QAs at other companies do, but I would like to talk about what differentiates the QAs at Line. The QA at Line don't test. Of course, if it's necessary, they do it if for just few exceptions. But the QA focuses on the overall product and procedure and thinking about the direction and the goals of the product, the procedure, the testing procedure, process definition, planning, development, and team test session pairing and debriefing the results is something that what the QA does. And they don't focus just on the sessions that they're in charge of, but they have to make decisions from a overall perspective. In other words, the QA generates a value of focusing on quality and all the activities that are related to this rather than just testing. Third, feedback and improvement. When deploying a product or when a task is completed, the procedure and the results need to be evaluated and to be reflected in improvements. So the work process and the procedure, the code quality during the development phase, and the issues that might be generated after the deployment need to be responded to. And the procedure and the quality assessment is something that needs to be done. For this, the QAs carry out a retrospective so that the feedback can be accumulated and that improvement items can be extracted from this. The QA will be an assister or assistant for the retrospective because they understand the process and they can evaluate what has been done well during this development cycle. And they also need to support the team so that they understand what their strengths and weaknesses are and help to come up with opinions. After participating in the meeting, the QA that has a overall understanding about the whole procedure should make sure that there were no any mistakes or whether the meeting is criticizing a single person to make sure that the meeting was rather productive and extracting a problem for that and creating a solution that responds to this problem is something that we can also support. And after the retrospective meeting, these items need to be translated into action items and created into documents so that these procedures can be reflected into the next project after communicating with the PIC. Lastly, the QA is an evangelist of quality culture. As you're probably aware, quality is not the single responsibility of the QA. It is a common responsibility of all interest groups that are in charge of the project. And the QA needs to help the continuity of the product in all stages and give guidance about how to do this and create a organization culture to make sure that this is continued. And this is the biggest role of a QA. So I've been talking about the four roles that the QA does in line, and let me come to the summary. But before I come to the summary and the conclusion, I would like to give you a suggestion. The product quality reflects the capacity of the members of a product in a project. Therefore, the participating QAs need to have rather adequate capabilities to plan, analyze, and interpret what's going on. The minimum tech understanding, the understanding about the service architecture, and knowledge about the code, and process and task management skills and communication skills to smoothly help communication amongst different departments. Therefore, reinforcing these skills is also a part of the QA's role. I would like to come to a conclusion. We've been talking about the four roles of a line QA, what we do, and the roles that we play. Planning and analyzing, co-work and testing, and feedback and improvement, and building a quality culture within the company. These four roles are very important, and this opportunity exists in line. This is the conclusion that I want to make. If you have used the methodology of Agile, you probably haven't heard about early testing and the shift left process and the importance of this. But Line QA wants to go ahead, and we don't want to be complacent. We try to break the silo to make sure that we are not stuck in R&Rs and department boundaries. We want to share the most updated information so that we can really accomplish our common goal. And we would like to advocate these kind of methods to other companies in the industry. Thank you very much for listening to the end of my presentation. Take care.